That was my introduction? Okay. Karen Royce, who is co-chair of the Creation Care Committee. She served on the vestry. She has done many things. You may know she's on the Landscape Committee. So before Easter, she was about our property, making it beautiful. Karen, is there any other? Tanzania, absolutely instrumental in the development of our partnership in Tanzania, as well as probably many other ministries that you do as well. So here you go, Karen.
Good morning. I have the pleasure of being up here with Lee Walker. I joined Christ Church and was received as an Episcopalian in 1987, which is when Lee came. So he was very much part of my experience of becoming an Episcopalian, and a very special part. 12 years. He left in 1999, and he hasn't really changed a bit. I've spent some time with him this weekend, and when I met him at the airport, we started talking. It was like yesterday. So welcome, Lee.
Thank you.
How many people were here with Lee and remember his great sermons? Lee thought that maybe all the people who knew him had passed on. Because
No, wait, hold on. Remember, when I was here, my ministry was focused on senior citizens. So when I left, most of the people I had my closest pastoral relationships with were over the age of 80. And I've been gone for 25 years, and it's so delightful to come back and find out most of you are still here. So,
what I was going to say is that, yes, that was his ministry, but he ministered to all of us. Lee, let's start at the beginning. What was your call to become a priest?
my calling?
Your calling.
I get asked that a lot. I don't have some moment that the heavens opened or I had some great revelation. I was raised in a fairly traditional family back in the late 40s and 50s, where going to the church was, in my mind, like going to the grocery store or the filling station or Woolworths. It was just something you did as a regular part of your life. And what I discovered is, as I was getting older, and by older I mean like into my early teens, and I realized that not all of my friends my age were staying with the church. And that was the first time it had really kind of struck me, oh, I guess that's an option. You know, I could either keep going or not. And it just kind of sank in on me that I really did like doing it. And I really did like this person named Jesus that they talked about so much, that he had a lot of influence. When I was in high school, I said to myself, the only other thing I thought about is law. So instead of focusing on religion my last 2 years in high school, I'm going to focus on law, and I loved it, and I really got a lot of respect for the legal profession. But I decided that's not me. I want to go to seminary. And once I stepped into seminary, I went, that's it. I made the right decision. So it was kind of lifelong.
Where did you go to seminary?
I went to General Seminary in New York City. Any of you who have never visited there, it's at 9th Avenue and 21st Street. They have a lovely courtyard surrounded by buildings, and it's a great place to go visit. Go there if you'd like to. And it's a good place to support, good seminary.
Had you been to New York City before going to seminary?
Yes, my dad worked. I grew up in Texas, but my dad did a lot of business in New York, and the whole family would travel up there. So I'd been going there since I was about 8 years old, regularly.
Lee's email is shamanlee7, and I've never asked him, how did Shaman Lee come about? And he said he had a story to tell about that.
Well, I'm old enough that I was able to get email back when nobody else was getting email. So my first email address was leewalker@aol.com. But then when I switched to another service, Lee Walker was already taken, and I didn't want to be Lee Walker 2714 or something like that. The word shaman had been introduced to me in a different way in seminary. I had always thought of shaman as something kind of pagan and worshiping spirits and things like that. When I was in seminary, I read in a book one time, a priest writing about the commonality between certain aspects of Christianity, Christianity and Native American religion. And their definition of the word shaman was the one who walks between the worlds, presenting each world to the other. The work of the priest, the defining work of the priest, is to present one world to another in reconciliation. The world of heaven to earth, people who are divided, it is presenting things divided to each other. And when I had to pick a new name, just off the top of my head, I said shaman, and they said it's already taken. I said, Shaman Lee, you got it.
You had quite a journey between Texas and Greenwich. Can you talk about that journey a little bit?
I was tarred and feathered and run out of town on a rail in Texas. I was in Texas, not. Back in 1985, I finally went to my bishop, and I don't mean to get into controversial matters here, but it's a fact of what happened. And I said, I am not ashamed of being a homosexual. I am ashamed of being a liar. And my entire life has been a living lie. And whether you agree with me or not, I want to at least be able to say that who I am going to tell the truth from now on. And he looked at me, the bishop, and said, that's wonderful, I admire you, I don't agree with you, and you're fired. And he could do that because under canon law, I was the vicar of a mission. So he had the direct power to be able to fire me. And I hadn't done anything. I had not been accused of any crime. I wasn't a member of any controversial groups or anything like that. I just said, I'm not going to lie anymore. And they told me, you will never work in Texas anywhere again, not as a priest. So I was transferred by my bishop to the bishop in New Mexico just to get me a membership out of Texas. And he told me, we'll keep you for a year, but you've got to find someplace else. And a friend who was the canon to the ordinary in the Diocese of New York said, we don't have a job waiting for you, but come up here, you'll never find a job in Texas. So come up here and we'll see if we can find you something. I thought, I've been a martyr for a liberal cause. I'll go up there and all these churches will want to give me a job. I got up here and there were 500 other martyrs for the cause standing in line in front of me, because New York was one of the only places that would take you. While I was looking in New York, a friend in Westchester County invited me to come stay with him. His next door neighbor was getting married, and all the clergy at her church, which was Christ Church Greenwich, were going to be out of town in August when she was being married. She said, I'd like you to do the marriage. And I said, well, I got to go talk to Jack Bishop, who was the rector at that time. I came down, talked to him about the wedding, and what I didn't know was the man who had been handling the seniors ministry, a retired priest, had dropped dead suddenly of a heart attack or a stroke. And he needed somebody to fill in quickly, but I didn't know that. So when I talked about the wedding, I was being interviewed for that job. And he hired me, and I think probably largely thanks to Mary Jane Marks in the bookstore, who really liked me. After about 6 months, he said, would you like to stay longer? And I said, I don't have any other offers. So I accepted Christ Church Greenwich because I was desperate. And I want you to know something. I had some problems with Greenwich, not the problems you would probably think about, weather, things like that. I'm from Texas. I also like being in an urban setting. And I can tell you from the bottom of my heart, and being back this weekend only increases the feeling. If Christ Church had been on the west side of Los Angeles, I would still be one of your priests. I love this parish, and I think it's only better from what I've seen.
I titled this The Motorcycle Priest because Lee arrived on a motorcycle, which is not really what one expects a priest to arrive on?
After I was fired, I had to sell my car, so the motorcycle was the only thing I had. And I did ride that for quite a while. I really enjoyed it. I rode it after I got to Los Angeles, but when I got to Los Angeles, it broke down, and it was going to cost more to fix it than it was actually worth. So I sold it. For a while, I borrowed motorcycles and rode, and then I finally, at the age of 65, I said, okay, I've been riding all these years, I'm still alive, maybe it's time to put the motorcycle away. So I did. But it turned out, I live in South Los Angeles. I was the first white man in living memory to move into the neighborhood where I was. And the fellow across the street from me is the head of a motorcycle gang. Now, when I saw it, I thought what you're thinking, like, oh my God, will I be safe when I walk out my front door? So one day I looked out, and there's about 40 guys on motorcycles in front of his house, and I thought, I'm going to get it over with. I've got to go over there and introduce myself. Walked across the street, walked up to Jerome, the guy who lives there, the head of the motorcycle group, and I told him who I was and that I was a priest, and I shook hands with him, and he said, well, let me introduce you. And I turned around to start meeting the other guys. He said, no, let me get the wife and kids out here. And he brings his wife and kids out. It is a family motorcycle club. They take their kids riding on the back of the bike. And I thought, I have a broken motorcycle. I can't ride with them.
You always, as long as I've known you, you've had this amazing open door hospitality that has led you to meet some really, really interesting people, and also to take care of some very interesting dogs. Could you talk about a couple of the people that you met while you were here and who you opened your door and were hospitable to?
Is James Allen here today? Okay, I thought he might be. James was somebody that had been involved with me in some of that. All my adult life, I have brought people in to live with me. Sometimes it's a neighbor who's having their house fumigated and needs someplace to stay for a week. Sometimes it's been somebody who literally shows up at the door and says, I got your name and phone number from somebody, I need help. And they'll come in. The bishop, I remodeled my house and added a second floor to make more room for families and friends to come stay with me. I have a lot of visitors come stay with me because I'm a free place to stay in Los Angeles. But when I added all these rooms, the bishop said, aha, I can use that. He calls me up one day and he says, I have an emergency for a family of 4 from Honduras. Their son needs surgery. They are immigrants. Could they stay with you while he's having the surgery? They stayed for 2 months. It was a magnificent experience. And since they came at the beginning of COVID, I have now housed 26 immigrants in my home. And by the way, I will say, all except 3 of them are here completely legally, having gone through the process to get here. The man who is currently staying in my house and looking after my dogs left Iran because he is a convert to Christianity. Took him 9 years to go through the process. That's 9 to 10 years is the average on it. I have also housed people, when I was living here, how many remember Joyce Romanello, who worked on staff here? I'm counseling a young couple who's getting married, and my door of my office flies open, and Joyce runs in, and she says, Lee, and I said, what are you doing? I'm counseling somebody. Why'd you come in? She said, it's an emergency. I'm talking to a man in the parking lot, and I think he's going to commit suicide. There's no place for him to stay here, our apartment. We had an apartment back then at the church for people to stay in. It's taken. And she said, I'm really worried he's going to kill himself. Could he stay with you for a couple of days? And I'm sitting there, and I looked at the couple, and I looked at Joyce, and I said, so what you're telling me is, I can either take him into my house and show him the loving face of Christ, or I can throw him out on the street and let him die hungry and cold and alone. And before Joyce could respond, the young bride that I was counseling with, who was probably about 20 years old, looks up and says, no, show him the loving face of Christ. And he came in, and he lived with me for a year and ended up being a night sexton working here at the church. While he was living with me, He had been fired by a racist boss. He was a black man. He had been fired from nearly 25 years at Amtrak handling luggage. I'm down at the city hall trying to find out how to get him on welfare and get him some money. And I found out while I was down trying to get him on welfare, he was at the Greenwich Library learning how to study and get a bus driver's license. He just retired about a year ago from being a bus driver. And he and I are in touch at least 4 or 5 times a year. He has come out and stayed with me once, and he's coming again this summer. And I have lots of stories like that. I'm single. I don't have any children. I don't have a wife. I can bring somebody in my house and not worry the way other people would. You've got ways you can help that you wouldn't think of ordinarily. And let me tell you, a lot of people out there that bad things are said about, some of them are bad people. Don't bring them into your house. But the church and other agencies can help you find people that are good to work with, whether you bring them into your house or whether you just help them find their own place. That's what Christ did. If you want to follow him, do that.
To lighten it a little bit, could you talk about your wonderful dogs that used to serenade us off your balcony?
I lived in the apartment on the second floor of the Annex building. And are there still hedges up there? Are there hedges up there around that? I built the boxes that their hedges are in because there was no door there to get out on the roof, but I built a wooden deck out there and put a barbecue grill out there. And for about 2 years, I climbed out the window and then to get onto the deck. And then I talked to the vestry, and they let a friend of mine who was just being discharged from the military as a doctor and had been told the day he was discharged that he had AIDS. And I said, Craig needs a place to be to kind of find himself. And he's a recent convert to Christianity. They let Craig come and stay with me, and they knocked out the stone wall where the window is and put in a beautiful door because Craig was on crutches and couldn't walk. And I just sat there and I went, that's Christ Church Greenwich, And when Craig to this day tells, the people said, well, when you were out of the military and you had no place to go, who took you in? Christ Church in Greenwich, Connecticut. You'd be surprised some of the free advertising you people are getting. Oh, and the dogs. I never got into the dogs up there. I'm sorry. I go astray a lot of times. I love dogs. I've had dogs all my life. When I left Texas, I lived out in the country on 6 acres of land where people buy puppies at Christmas and then dump them in the forest in spring because they're not cute anymore. And French poodles are supposed to be able to hunt and fend for themselves. Dogs would wander up all the time. When I moved to New York from my house in Keller, Texas, I had 21 or 22 dogs. And it's hard to find somebody to rent your house and take on the dogs, but I found somebody. And they rented them. I couldn't have a dog in New York, but when I came out here, that's why I built that deck. Was I could put them out the window and let them be out there. And I went through a lot of stuff with Jack Bishop. When I first started this, he said, those dogs growl at every pleasure that drives up under your balcony up there. And he said they bark at them. But after a while, those dogs, they had the best place with the campus up here. I've now got 3 dogs. One just died. One was inherited from a man who was homeless who lived with me for 3 years. And we got him an apartment in a public assist place. And when I went over the day that he died in his new apartment, the police were in there and they said his dog was sleeping next to him when we found him. And they're not supposed to do it, but I talked them into giving me his dog. And she just died a week before I came here. So dogs have always been a really important part of my life. And I will tell you, dogs have been excellent ministers to me. They really have been. I love them.
Unconditional love. Can you tell us about Roll the Stone Away? We still roll the stone away at Easter. This is who started Roll the Stone Away, but I've never known how it got started.
It's not the same stone by any chance, is it? It can't be. It can't. I was going to say, because that thing was falling apart when I left. the choir asked me if I could do something with the kids about rolling the stone away. I got a bunch of boxes and cut up the cardboard and ended up making this wheel of stone that was about this tall from the floor here, but it was lightweight. And during the singing of The Angels Roll the Stone Away, or something like that, the kids and I would roll it up and down, and every Easter when we did this, it would start falling apart. And it had duct tape all over it, and I finally spray painted gray. I just thought y'all would burn it when I left. I didn't know it would still be done. I'm happy to hear it's still being done.
A few years ago, I saw someone spray painting a kiddie pool out on the lawn. I thought, what are they doing? And that was the new stone.
That was the new stone?
A teenager was doing it. Leaving Greenwich for South LA, I asked Lee what was his new parish like. And I hope this doesn't offend anybody, but he said to me, I'm going to be the scoop of vanilla ice cream on the chocolate cone. And how did that work out?
Well, somebody in the vestry had actually developed that line that I used later when I talked to you, and he was using it not in a derogatory way, but he meant it's going to take us a little adjusting, and we knew that when we hired you, because it's an entirely black parish in an entirely black neighborhood that is the black neighborhood for black cultural events in Los Angeles. It's the Crenshaw district. In fact, one of the women here in the parish, an elderly lady, before I left, comes up to me and she said, this is in 1987, she says, Father Walker, I saw a movie this weekend that is all about your new neighborhood in Los Angeles, and I think you should go and see it to get ready. And I said, what's it called? Boys in the Hood. Boys in the Hood, Baby Boy, and Training Day were all filmed within a quarter mile of my house. Well, I went down with fear and misgiving, like, am I going to be safe in my new parish? When I went down for my interview on Friday night, I was staying in a hotel. I went out at midnight, and I went to everything that I could find that was open at midnight on Friday night in my new neighborhood. Bars, laundromats, weird places that sold things I didn't even know what they were. And sure enough, every time I walked in the door, it was just like in the movies. Everybody would stop, turn around and look at me, and after about 5 seconds of silence, they would go back to what they're doing. First lesson I learned, I'm more concerned about my skin color than they are. Saturday morning the next day, I went out to drive around the neighborhood and see what it's like on Saturday morning. I'm driving past houses. Every one of the houses in my neighborhood has iron bars on every door and every window. Not a good sign. But I looked in the front yards, and every one of those front yards had a father throwing a football to a son or a mother planting flowers in the flower bed with a daughter. I'm going to tell you something I didn't expect to. About the second month I was there, I'm coming home late at night. Everything is closed. The only thing that's open is a little fried chicken stand. I was hungry, so I thought I'd go in and get something. There's 3 young black fellows in their late teens, early 20s, pants down, hanging off their rear end, boom box on one guy's shoulder, just as stereotype as you can imagine. I got my food, I walked out, and as I'm walking out, I see out of the corner of my eye, they're following me out the door. They don't have any food. They're just coming out after me. I knew I couldn't outrun them, so I heard one of them say, hey, you in the red T-shirt. I was wearing a red T-shirt. I just said, go to the car, don't interact with them, just go to the car and try to get in. And the guy's following me saying, hey, I'm talking to you. That's rude. You listen to me when I'm talking to you. So finally I turned around and I said, how may I help you? And he came up to me and he said, you know, are you new in this neighborhood? And I said, actually I am. I just moved here. And he said, well, you better learn some manners when people speak to you or you're going to lose all your money. And I thought, oh, he means he's going to rob me because I was rude. And I said, well, I'll try to remember that. And he hands me a $20 bill and says, this fell out of your pocket. And I went and sat in the car and I went, God forgive me, I'm a latent racist and I didn't know it. And the next day I went up to the local mall and I sat on a bench in the mall for about 3 hours and listened to all the black teenagers walking up and down the mall. They were talking about exactly the same thing that the teenagers in Greenwich talk about. Who's dating who got a new car for graduation and who didn't, where we're going next Friday night. And let me tell you something, I never considered myself a racist. I don't still consider myself a racist, but I learned I take a lot of things for granted. I hear a lot of stories without understanding the impact. I didn't hear any new stories in that parish, but for the first time in my life, I heard them from people who also made their confessions to me, made their pledges to the church, and talked with me at vestry meetings. And finally what I found out was, oh my God, it's really true. We are all just children of God. And I never really felt it till I got down there.
Well, I think that's a great note to end the formal part and ask people to ask Lee questions and hopefully prompt some more great stories from him.
I have so many things I could say, but one is, after you were in the Crenshaw district, and by the way, what cross street was that? Because how near Wilshire was that?
Oh, way from Wilshire. Yeah, Wilshire is where Crenshaw ends on the north end. I know you were up in Hancock Park, weren't you? Yeah, I go down across the Interstate 10 and about another 5 minutes until you get down to what used to be Santa Barbara and is now Martin Luther King Boulevard. So I was, do you know where that is? It's Adams, Jefferson, then the next big one is Martin Luther King. I'm 3 blocks from there. I live in a 2-story house with gardens in the front and same house, gardens in the front, gardens in the back. I walk out my front door and it's 2 blocks to the new subway station. So I've got my country garden and I've got my subway and I'm in heaven. Oh, I retired after 30 years in 2003. I was ordained at the age of 25. So at 55, I'd put in 30 years. In 2003, I continued to work part-time at various parishes, and I am now attending at St. John's Cathedral, where I am not on the staff, but as a courtesy, I'm listed as an assisting priest. And I preach occasionally and help out pastorally, that sort of thing. And it's really kind of nice because I work when I want to and I don't work when I don't want to.
And that was the church that Sally Herring went to, and that's the church that Cheryl Kyle goes to.
That's down in Huntington Beach, St. James the Great, where they are. Is Greg Gregory here today?
Yeah,
Greg Gregory, you have a gift package that I left, I think, with Karen. Did I leave it with you?
I leave it in my car.
Yeah,
it's in
from
my
Sally Herring. From Sally Herring.
I've visited Lee at least once where he lives now. But before I got there, when he bought the house, he told me that he had bought a house that looked just like a Taco Bell.
Yes!
And when I got there, he was right. It looked just like a Taco Bell.
The neighborhood I live in, I had been going to Los Angeles since I was 4 years old with my family, but I knew the tourist corridor from downtown to the Pacific Ocean. I'd never heard of Leimert Park, which is the neighborhood I live in, Leimert, Leimert Park. Google it. It's a fascinating place. It is now the African-American neighborhood. When it was built in 1924, it was the only structure within 20 minutes of downtown were the houses in Leimert Park. No other buildings were around it, and the entire neighborhood was covenanted, which meant it was written into the deed of sale that no Jew, no Catholic, no person of color could rent or buy in that neighborhood. It is now the premier black neighborhood in the city, and I've got to share this with you. The house almost across the street from me was vacant the first 10 or 15 years that I lived there, because the family that had lived there, a man and a woman, bought it in the 1920s as their honeymoon house. They were both very racist, And when the husband died and the woman went to a nursing home, she said to her children, I'm leaving you the home, but do not, even though you have to now because of the law, I don't want you to ever sell it or rent it to a person of color until after I die. After she died, they sold the house. I went over and introduced myself to the man who bought it. He and his family had them over for dinner. And he's talking about growing up in Los Angeles. And I said, but you didn't live in Leimert Park. You couldn't have when you were a child. He said, no, you couldn't. I was black. I couldn't live here. But he said, I was the paper boy for Leimert Park. And I said, how did they treat you? And he said, most people treated me very well. But one man, the first time I went to collect the money for the paper, he said, I'm not going to pay. And he said, what do you mean you're not going to pay? And he said, you're going to bring my paper for free. And he said, well, I'm going to call the Los Angeles Times and tell them you're not paying and I can't deliver your paper. And he said, I'll get you fired. Who do you think they're going to believe, you or me? And I said, what'd you do? And he said, for 5 years I delivered that man his paper for free. It was the only way I could keep my job. And I said, I don't want to know his name. That's not my business. But I'd like to know, is he still alive? And he said, no, he's dead now. And I said, what house did he live in? Do you remember? He said, the house I bought. And I mean, those are the experiences that I will just always cherish. And another thing I learned, like somebody in my parish one day, all black parish entirely, somebody said that one of the things they loved about that parish was the rich ethnic mixture. And I said, well, what's the mixture, them and me? I mean, what's the mixture? It had never really sunk in on me before. My congregation was all black, but they were African Americans, Jamaicans, Hondurans, Belizeans, Bahamians, and they didn't always get along with each other. And the people from the Caribbean did not like gospel music. They found that to be rather low class. They were used to Commonwealth Church of England worship. And so I began to find out how many things I'd missed because I just looked at a group of people and went, oh, those people, without giving credit to that group is made up of fascinating, unique individuals, and only they could teach me that. Just like I found out that all the well-to-do and powerful people, there's a lot of uniqueness there too. That was a delight to discover here.
So, welcome, Father Walker. 32 years ago, I was a nascent senior, I guess, and you agreed to marry Lisa and I, and performed the ceremony. But before the ceremony, you asked, if you should include you said you don't want may you
Have children?
flourish and multiply.
Yes.
So I said, no, we said yes, we would like to, and I know that was very hard for you. But I have to report, 32 years later, we are incredibly happily married, and we have 2 more children who have stepped into life, and it's all because of your blessing.
And I'm glad we prayed for your children that day then.
Father Walker, I remember in your office you had this awesome poster, at least I thought it was an awesome poster, and it said, I have come to save your soul, not steal your brain.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the last part of what you said.
I have come to save your soul, not steal your brain.
Oh, yes. It was a poster that was talking about churches that more brainwash you and with dogma than help you explore and find your relationship with Christ. And the quote, I believe, is, He died to take away your sins, not your mind. That was it. He died to take away your sins, not your mind.
Yeah, go ahead.
What made you leave Greenwich?
Beg your pardon?
What made you leave Greenwich?
I had been here for 12 years. I had friends in Los Angeles. I would go and spend summer vacation out in Los Angeles. And really, I meant what I said earlier. If Christ Church were on the west side of Los Angeles, I'd still be there. The weather. I was born in Texas. I'm used to running around in shorts and short sleeves and all that. And it was really the weather. And I figured, I don't know if I'm going to find another church like Christ Church, but I bet there's good churches out here. And so I just kind of kept putting my name in. And one day, there was also something, I don't share this very often, it just occurred to me. Right about a year before I left, I was talking to somebody at City Hall, and it was the first time I'd done this. I'm just embarrassed to say this. I was getting nowhere with the person, and I was just trying to get something simple done about something we needed on a work permit here at the church or whatever. And finally, this person who wouldn't help me, I just said, "Excuse me, I am not going to wait any longer on this. Do you know who you're talking to? I am Father Lee Walker from Christ Church." And all of a sudden, when I said it, I went, "Oh my God, I'm starting to think like that makes me better than other priests, that I'm at this big, wonderful, beautiful church." I said, "I need to go someplace else and learn a little humility again." And about a week later comes up this thing about this small black church that's on the verge of closing in Lamert Park. And I said, "I want something unique. I've never been in charge of a black church before." And I said, "I'm going to take a chance and go on this." And it was a great move. It really was.
Lee, about 20-odd years ago, you took a group of us to Africa led by Karen. And we had a wonderful relationship with Bishop Simon and Martha. Could you just tell us about your experience of taking a group to Africa, to Tanzania, and the relationship that Simon and Martha had with you and the rest of the church?
Well, talk about an example of learning humility. I wasn't the only one. Several people on the staff back then, when we heard about this first trip that was being organized to go over there, our reaction was kind of like, do the people in Greenwich know where they're going? It's way out in the boondocks. It's not just going to be sightseeing. They're going to have to roll up their sleeves and do manual labor with the native people over there. And a lot of us on the staff were like, what is this going to be? Is this going to be like Greenwich does Africa or what? Well, the first trip goes over, and I found out, good Lord, the good that was being done, the people who came back here with changed views and changed attitudes, and the resources and connections this parish could make for a place like the Diocese of Mount Kilimanjaro over there. So I went on the next trip. I ended up going on 2 trips. It's where I really got to know Karen the most. And I am so delighted that that work has continued. While I was over there, I meet Bishop McCundy and his wife Martha. We're talking, and he's asking me about what could I do to help solidify the bonds between the parish of Christ Church and my diocese. Because he was sort of worried about they'll all come over and have fun and then it'll fizzle out. And I said, would you consider coming and visiting us? And he said, what would I do? And I said, I understand you have a sabbatical coming up shortly. And he said, yes, for 3 months. And I said, would you, as a bishop, like to come to Christ Church Greenwich as a curate? He came, and for 3 months, he vested as a bishop, did the bishop's blessings at services, but he served as a curate, as if he were the new low guy on the totem pole. And he and his wife, they visited in people's homes, they had dinner, they met families. It was just absolutely marvelous. And then after that, it was a real solid, it was solid already, but it was a real solid tie. And I have never before and never since seen an example, not of a retired bishop, but a bishop who is still in office and working, and said 3 months as a curate? Sure. And he told me after he had done it, he said, Christ Church Greenwich reminded me of a lot of things I knew when I was a younger priest and had forgotten. And he said it was a real good time for me. And just lovely bonds that were being made there. And so excited to hear about the church in Cuba. And what else did I hear? There was something else I thought that besides Tanzania. Oh, it was Neighbor to Neighbor, the brand new building over here. Neighbor to Neighbor was in the basement underneath me, and Karen was telling me about the new facilities, and I thought, oh, a new and better basement, you know. And I went over there and I thought, this work is expanded. This is great. And something else I told Karen this morning, she told me at Neighbor to Neighbor, instead of being handed a sack of groceries, they go in and pick out what they want off the shelf according to points. I know places that do that. That restores so much human dignity. Not just being handed a box and saying one size fits all, but to be able to feel like I'm in the grocery store picking out what my family likes. God bless you for doing that, all that thing.
Thank you. That was almost like a paid advertisement, but I didn't prompt any of it. I wanted to talk about the transformation that happened on one of those trips. One of the fathers of a child that was baptized this morning, Sam Keys, and my daughter, Wesley Royce, went on that trip when they were 8, 9 years old. And it was amazing to see Sammy up there today having his 3rd child baptized. Sam had an older brother, has an older brother, named Bill. Oh, that's his dad. What's his brother's name? Anyway, his brother turned 21 on the trip. And that trip changed his whole direction in life. He went back to college and was very interested in studying land use management. And he is now the head of Greenwich Land Trust. So take a risk. Go somewhere that you can't imagine what it's going to be like. And some people in the room have gone on trips to Tanzania. It's transformational. Other people who would like to ask a question?
Hi, Father Lee. Just in terms of that trip to Tanzania that I was on as well, there was one day where we went out to a Maasai village, and the village was being converted en masse into Christianity. And the service was in Maasai, Swahili, and English, and you presided over it. And I think even before it started, there was a exorcism that took place before the service. And I always wondered what you thought about that day, about that moment, about those people, and about us as visitors seeing all that.
Was this the day that a lot of Lutheran Maasai came over?
Yes.
Yeah, because we were having the first Anglicans baptized or confirmed, the first Anglicans at that service, and the Lutherans from another Maasai village who had converted sometime earlier, like a year or two earlier, they all came and joined. And the main thing I remember, besides just the wonder of watching all these new converts jumping up in the air, which the Maasai men do to impress the women. How high can you jump up? That was part of the thing. As I sat there and I went, look at all these Lutherans coming to support their Anglican brothers and sisters in Christ. I don't see this in America. And here they are out here, the new converts, doing what they're supposed to do, which is putting labels aside and getting together in the name of Jesus Christ. I'm so glad you were on that. How many other people have been to Tanzania on one of those trips that are in here? Go if you haven't already. It really is. It still a week of work and a week of... oh, it's all vacation now? Okay, go. It's good. Oh, and by the way, while I'm thinking of it beforehand, I would like to introduce somebody, probably embarrass them. Max and Shelby, would you stand up? This is my niece and her fiance, Max. They live in... They live in Manhattan, and they came out. I told them, I wanted them to come out because I wasn't sure how many people would remember me, and I wanted to see some familiar faces out there in the congregation.
I'd like you to share what your thoughts were the first time we had to eat locally cooked food, at least not the most eclectic Catholic eater I've ever met. And he was the person of most dignified, most important person there, so he had to take the first bite. And I remember sitting there thinking, oh, this is really good. This is really rich. How is Lee going to do this?
Well, the thing is, I'm very picky about eating, and it's not just that I prefer ice cream to Brussels sprouts. I mean, there's a lot of things that I just cannot swallow. I just cannot take the taste of it. And I am not experimental with food. And I kept thinking about the story that was told about Prince Charles when he was much younger. He's visiting around the Commonwealth. And he had the same problem with eating. And he had asked the prime minister of whatever Commonwealth nation he was visiting, he said, I know I'm going to have to eat the food and everybody's going to be watching me. He said, what will happen if I cannot eat the food that is put in front of me? And the prime minister smiled at him and said, nothing will happen, people will understand, and the next day, 40 million members of the Commonwealth will leave it. And I thought, oh my God, are all these Anglicans going to leave the church if I don't eat the food? And I found out that a lot of the food that I was served reminded me of Mexican food. And I love Mexican food. So whenever it was something that was strange or was still moving or had too many legs or whatever it was that was different about it, I would just sit there and go, taco, and eat it. And it was good. But I really worried about that everywhere we went. I really did.
I think
And
it was goat that I was worried about you having to eat.
The other thing I was not used to there that worked out very well was preaching a sermon that had to be translated for the people sentence by sentence almost. I would say something and then Bishop McCundy would come in to translate it and I wouldn't quit talking and he would have to keep going, shh, shh, have to translate it like that.
Of course, we'd all been told by our medical consultants back here not to eat anything that was not in a hotel also. That was part of it. This was back in 1998, I think.
I think it was 1998. No, 1995 was the first
Yes.
one because I met my parents in
right.
Israel and then went on and met y'all in
Okay,
Kenya in 1995.
95 was
yeah.
the first one. That's the one that Sam and Wesley went on. Anyway, it's 12:20. I don't want to keep people. Lee will be here for a little while if people want to come up and speak with him. But thank you so much for being here, Lee.
And let me just say before you stand up, this trip has really been good for me. I have to tell you, a couple of people said something to me about, oh yes, we remember you. I wasn't sure how many people would. I've gotten some real ego massaging since I've been here, and thank you very much for it. It's nice to know that I keep thinking back all of those years ago, oh, I should have done a better job at this, I should have done a better job at that. And I had, yes, I should have done a better job at a lot of things, but I had forgotten how loving and understanding you are. Thank you so much for today and for those 12 years. Well, thank you. Thank you.
That's pretty simple. I went over the stories I wanted him to tell and let him go. But thank you. I was a little nervous, but it's Lee. Who was that guy who spoke? I don't remember him being on the trip.
Really nice job. That's great.
Welcome back.
Yeah, thank you.